Morning, everyone. Welcome to church this morning. We are continuing our series entitled Truth. If you are visiting with us this morning, we've been looking at something over the last little while of when God has an inheritance for us, which He has for all of us. He requires, and it's not just a promise that sits in front of us, but there's a step of obedience that's required to step in and take that inheritance of what God has for us. And just as much as we've got an inheritance in front of us, the enemy has got giants waiting in the land, just like with the children of Israel. The giants terrified them, and so they ran off into the desert, and they actually all died off in the desert, and eventually only came back. Their children came back after that generation had died and ended up taking the land. And so last week I spoke about the giant of look good, and I really felt after I'd finished preaching that there was something missing, and I thought about it on Sunday, thought about it on Monday, and I phoned a couple of guys on the preaching team on Monday and just said to them, I feel like what I didn't speak about was, it's great to talk about the giant of looking good when we try and look good in a corporate context, or we try and look good in a secular context, in a workplace, or when it comes to choosing life partners and all those kind of things. You can listen to last week's sermon to get the lowdown on that. But what I didn't speak about is what happens when that giant infiltrates the church. What happens when we are trying to look good for one another and we're trying to look good before God? Because it seems like this giant isn't just a giant we conquer there, but he's got a way of sneaking into the camp and getting into our hearts. So I'm going to read to us from Galatians chapter 2 this morning, and then we'll jump in from there. So Galatians 2, Paul's writing. Now Cephas, and this is Peter. Anyway, I'll just change it to Peter. So he says, when Peter came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face, because he stood condemned. Before certain men came from James, he used to eat with the Gentiles. But when they arrived, he began to draw back and separate himself from the Gentiles, because he was afraid of those who belonged to the circumcision group. The other Jews joined him in his hypocrisy, so that by their hypocrisy even Barnabas was led astray. When I saw they were not acting in line with the truth of the gospel, I said to Peter in front of them all, "You're a Jew, yet you live like a Gentile and not like a Jew. How is it then that you force Gentiles to follow Jewish customs?" And so what happened here was, remember, the church was birthed in Jerusalem. It was Jews, right? Those are the people, all the disciples were Jews. And what happened is the church grew. There was a great persecution in Jerusalem in the early church. We read about it in the book of Acts, and people just ran for their lives, like ran for the hills. And wherever they went, they took the gospel. The gospel was preached. And one of the places they went was this city called Antioch. And so they're sitting up in Antioch, and these Gentiles. And Peter comes up. Remember Peter who denied Jesus? Peter who preached at Pentecost, this like incredible apostle. Peter arrives, and he's like, he understands the grace that they have before God. So, kind of just go with the paraphrase. Peter's sitting there, and he's no longer under the law. So as a Jew, he can eat bacon, and he's enjoying pork sausages, and he's like eating and drinking with the Gentiles and loving life, like living in his freedom. Nothing wrong with it. Absolutely nothing. Free, right? But what happened was, Peter's up there, and then some of the Jews came up from Jerusalem. And Peter now was worried about what they thought about him, and he wanted to look good for them. He didn't want to look bad. So Peter all of a sudden now jumps up from the table, wipes the bacon off his mouth, and goes and sits with the Jews, and then he starts pointing fingers at the Gentiles and saying, "Oh, you can't do that. No." And he starts putting these laws back on the Gentiles, forcing them to try and be Jews. And Paul arrives, and he looks at Peter, and he goes, "What on earth are you doing? You're such a hypocrite." And he calls him out on it, because he says, "You're a Jew, you live like a Gentile," which is fine, you're free under the law. But then how is it that you're trying to force the Gentiles to live like a Jew? You're being a hypocrite. And this is the thing. It's one of the first real pictures that we see in the Bible of this giant of looking good infiltrating the church, or him making the grand comeback and having a go at the church on the inside. And so he does it on this example with Peter. And Peter gives into this thing of wanting to look good. And so he starts criticizing, he starts to put the law on these Gentiles. And this is the thing, friends. I've come to realize that this happens so easily to us, even in the church. It can happen so quickly that looking good in the church becomes the most important thing to us, that it even trumps our relationship with Jesus. I'm being vulnerable with you guys. There's been times in my life when I've been more worried about what the church thinks about me than what Jesus thinks about me. I've been more worried what other Christians think about me than what Jesus thinks about me, 100%. And that's the thing I'd like to speak about this morning, is how do we live free from that, and what does it look like when we do live in that place? Unfortunately, when we do that, we start to give in to what others think rather than what Jesus thinks. We reduce the church to a carnal institution that holds sway and power over people through position and influence. And we see it just like a corporate ladder. And I walk into the church, so I've got to please and look good for this bunch of people because they're the leaders, and if I look good for them, then they'll promote me, and one day I'll be a leader, and then I'll have a position of power and authority. And it's all a load of bulldust because Jesus is the head of the church. It's not about looking good. We forget that the church is the church of Jesus, made and being shaped into his likeness with ever-increasing glory. The only one we should be trying to look good before is Jesus. And so I've got 3 points, just 3 quick points. It's a long one, a medium one, and then a very short one at the end. And then we'll land it there. So with the first one, about keeping up appearances in the church, I've just called religiosity or religion in the church. When I talk about religion, some of us, I don't know what your church background is, some of us, religion, you talk about your faith as religion. I'm talking about religion being the opposite of faith. Religion, as I'm talking about, is the works where I try and achieve the gospel, where I try to achieve my salvation by the good things that I do. I feel justified before God because of what I've done, not because of what Jesus has done. That's what I'm talking about when I say religion. So Paul says this in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 7 to 9. He says, serve wholeheartedly as if you are serving the Lord, not people, because you know that the Lord will reward each one for whatever good they do, whether they are slave or free. So serve wholeheartedly as if you're serving the Lord. Forget about whoever else you're serving. Because the problem is you start trying to serve those people. You want to look good for them, right? You want to impress them. And all of a sudden now you've handed over authority to them. And you're no longer living under the authority of what God has for you. So I'm going to be vulnerable for a sec. A couple of years ago, I got given an opportunity. We're part of a bigger church network. And the big church network, New Covenant Ministries, had a big meeting on called Equip. And it was the final evening of Equip. And they asked me to lead the meeting. They'd asked me a few days before, and I said, yeah, for sure, no problem. But as the day got closer and closer to leading the meeting, friends, I got more and more wound up. Guys, you have no idea. I was like stressed out. I was like freaked out. I was like, what happens if I make a mistake? What happens if I stand up there and look like an idiot? What happens if I say the wrong thing? You know, there's all these Christians. It's the last night of the conference if I absolutely shank it. And when I look back now, all it was this giant of look good in my ear, just There's nothing wrong with God. I want to represent you well. There's nothing wrong with Lord. I want people to hear what you have to say. Make me less so that you can be more. But I was doing the complete opposite. I was over aware of myself. And I nearly turned it down. I nearly cancelled. I mean, I didn't in the end, and I went through with sweat and bullets. It was terrifying. But the reason it was terrifying was because I was over aware of myself. I was trying to look good, trying to say the right thing, trying to impress, trying to look good in the eyes of others. And I'm very, very aware of that. And it's funny because I think at the time I justified it with, the reason I'm feeling so anxious is I really want to represent the heart of God. And I think I even told myself that and even believed it maybe. But looking back, giant of look good nearly tripped me up and nearly took me out in that moment. I wonder, I wrote a few things down here, and this may be a bit controversial for some of us, but here we go, I'm just going to say it. I wonder how many people have wasted years of their lives attending courses and Bible schools and the like, not because they wanted to learn or grow, but merely to be seen to be learning and growing. I wonder how much time and petrol have been wasted on people attending prayer meetings merely to be seen to be attending those prayer meetings. I wonder how many tires and vehicles have been worn out over the years on mission trips. And these mission trips existed merely because a church community wanted to appear to have an outreach heart, not because they ever did. The giant of looking good, draining the church. I said last week that the giant of looking good is the giant of waste. Pouring out our energy and finance and time and all our resources on trying to look good. And the crazy thing is it can look the same as the good stuff on the surface, but we know the motive of what's going on inside of our hearts. And that's something so real. Like this giant, because it's so close to home and it deals with the motives of our heart and our sin nature. And I say this, only you can answer these questions for yourself. And it's not good for us and it's not right for us to judge someone else and tell them that, hey, let's look good operating in your life there. Even if it's your spouse, right? Probably not a good thing unless they ask. But to be honest with ourselves and look and go, am I doing these things that I'm doing because I want to honor God and I want to learn and I want to grow and I want to do what He's called me to do? Or am I doing them to be seen to be doing them? I think this giant of look good is one of the reasons why some of us have been so hurt in the church. I'm not forgiving poor leadership. I think that I've led incredibly poorly at stages in my life. I've hurt people because of my poor leadership. But if I come into the church wanting to be recognized and wanting to look good, I'm already sensitive. I've already got a limp. I already have a blind spot and a space where I could be easily injured. Because if there is poor leadership in that area and I'm not recognized, and I'm not loved and cared for and pastored and all that kind of stuff, I'm not made to feel like I look good, I can get offended and I can get hurt and I can walk away from, follow Jesus, but walk away from purpose and walk away from the church for however long it was. If we give into that, we are headed for failure before we even begun. At times in my life, I've been so intent on looking good for someone in the church because I felt like the church was like this ladder, become a deacon, then an elder, then a pastor, then a super pastor, then an epic pastor, then an apostle, and then a super apostle, and after that an angel. I don't know, then an archangel. I don't know. But we've got this idea, and so I think I've got to look good for the next guy just to move forward. And when those people let me down, that I'm looking up to for recognition, it really, really hurts in a way that it shouldn't, right? It does hurt. I'm not denying that. We've all experienced some level of hurt, but it shouldn't hurt that much. 1 Corinthians 13:3, Paul says, "If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast about it, but do not have love, I gain nothing." And so he's saying, you can do all this stuff. Give all I possess to the poor and give my body to hardship that I can look good when I do it. Right? I gain absolutely nothing if there's no love in it. And it's a really sobering thought, that, friends, that Jesus is looking at our heart. Jesus is looking at our motive. He is looking at where we're coming from. And he watches it very, very closely. He wants to know, is your motive me? Right? Or is your motive in this thing? If people look, because it's very easy and I've seen this, and I've seen it in my own life. It's easy for me to choose suffering, right? It's easy for me to choose suffering because it makes me look good. And people would go, oh, what an amazing person. Look how he's laying down his life. Look what he did here. Look what he did there. Such an incredible person. Look how he's helping someone. It's the guy who sees the person at the traffic light and then goes, sure, the guy's got nothing. I need some content for my Instagram post. Hey buddy, hop in the car, we'll go to Spa. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I want to buy you some groceries. But while we walk around Spa, I've got my Instagram live feed or my Facebook live feed. Look what I'm doing for this person. And so the Bible says even that act that you did there, right, it's absolutely worthless. It's a selfish act because it wasn't born out of love, it was born out of me. Secondly, I think with this, not in a new point, but under this thing of religion, problem with when this look good giant has infiltrated my life is what happens when I stumble? What happens when I fall? Well, this is what happens. The first thing I stumble and I fall, I ask the question, who knows about it? Like, who knows? Has it been spread around? And then I don't want people to ask me about it. I've done something stupid. And so I don't want to look bad. And so what I do is I run from the church and I distance myself from the church. I run and hide. And it's why gossip is so deadly in the church. Why is gossip so juicy? Because our masks and our facades are so important to us. And gossip speaks about the thing that's behind it. And we hate that because we're exposed. Can I say this? In a world without facades where people aren't pretending, gossip holds no sway. Can't hurt us. Because we're not pretending. And I'm not excusing gossip for a second, friends, at all. But what I am saying is there needs to be when I live open, there's nothing. You can say what you want to say about me. I love that about, I've had a few friends where, close friends, that we talk about things, and we're real honest about stuff, and someone will go to them and say, did you know this about John? And we're like, yeah, 100%. It just takes all the sting out of it because I'm not hiding it. There's no gossip there because we already have this open relationship. That's the way it's meant to be. I think in this moment, this speaks about the one that goes astray, friends. And this is often how we become the one that goes astray. Because we've fallen, we've stumbled, we've done something wrong or whatever has happened, and we just don't know how to forgive ourselves. So we run and hide because we don't look good anymore. Our facade or who we look like has gone to bits. And can I say this, as a pastor, probably the primary reason, when I go looking for the one, when I go looking for that person, the primary reason people cut and run is because they are so worried about what people think, because they dropped the ball. And when I go there, I find them to be the prisoner of the giant of looking good. If I go back to church, what are people going to think? It's the thing that what are people going to think? And so I hide because I don't look good. And it's the giant whispering in our ear, keeping us trapped. The very thing I need to be free from, the giant, right? He knows that I'll be free from that giant if I'm open about things and I'm not trying to hide stuff. So what he does is he just whispers, you're going to look bad, you're going to look bad. And so he keeps me held, he keeps me locked down. He not only causes anxiety, waste, and distance, but he whispers in our ear that until we look good, Jesus and his church won't accept us. And so we believe it. We buy into the lie. The enemy knows that when we find Jesus, we find love, restoration, forgiveness, identity. And in that moment, he loses his hold over us. And so he'll do anything to keep us from that place. People who have let others down and are embarrassed, you know, when you get to that place, I've let somebody else down, I'm embarrassed. I'd rather hide, because this is the way we deal with it nowadays. It's like, I don't want to go and just deal with it with this person. What I'd rather do is hide, block you, and never see you again, rather than face you and look bad. Rather than face you and not look good in that moment. Because in that moment of repentance, in that moment of trying to make things right, I look like an idiot. And rightfully so. And friends, it's one of the things that this giant just tells us we cannot absolutely do, because optics, the way you appear, your perception, is more important than anything else. And so over church history, unfortunately, the church has become a splintered mess. Because we fight, and because we don't want to look bad and we all want to look good, we just run off and start our own things. And so the church has just gradually gone from the church in the book of Acts to many churches. And I think multiple expressions of local church is beautiful. But what I disagree with is the way that all the churches disagree with one another. Not all the churches, but many churches disagree with one another. And we'll talk about be right later on. But we don't want to make up and we don't want to talk because I don't want to appear to look bad. I just want to look good. 1 John 1:9 says, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. He is faithful and just to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. This is the absolutely beautiful picture and power of repentance and being restored. Friends, when we come back to him, Jesus isn't going to sit there and scream at us, tell us how dirty we look, how bad we look. He's faithful and just to cleanse us from all unrighteousness and restore us. But, here's the big but, what about the church? And that's one of the hardest things, right? Because I know Jesus will, but I go back to the church and maybe not. Here's a gentle thought and a very subtle rebuke, if I can, for us, all of us Christians. I believe sometimes we are the agent of the giant in the lives of others. If it was for Jesus, people would come back. But because we expect people to look good, and because we set a bar, and because we're going to look down at people because of what they've done, they stay away. And friends, that's one of the ways the giant works his way. He almost turns the church into one of his agents. And so people now all of a sudden have got this bar of behavior they're trying to jump through, and they can't do it, so eventually they just run. Love Jesus, hate the church. And friends, it's a good time to look through our hearts and ask ourselves, do I expect others to look good? Do I hold others to some sort of moral standard that I myself can't keep? Jesus, even, and I'll talk about it a little bit later on, I think when Jesus talks to the Pharisees, he says to them, you know what? You guys place loads on people's shoulders that you yourselves can't even carry. And that's what we're doing in that moment. Especially the more mature Christians amongst us. We expect that Christians should be a certain way, paying no mind to where they're at, what God is doing in the season that those people are going through. And say this, we should be careful that we don't find ourselves earning medals on the wrong side of the battle. Here's a great question. When I speak to someone, am I trying to look good? And I expect them to be doing the same? Or am I asking Jesus, help me move and love them as he does? Anyway, that's the first one, around religion. Oof, heavy, eh? Like quite a thing. Second one is looking for positions of leadership in the church, right? Religion, now about leadership. In Matthew 23, Jesus talks about the Pharisees. He says, everything they do is done for people to see. They make their phylacteries wide. Phylacteries was this little box that they wore on their head with the scriptures inside. And the tassels on their garments long. They love the place of honor at banquets and the most important seats in the synagogues. They love to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and to be called rabbi by others. But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher and you are all brothers. Do not call anyone on earth father, for you have one Father and he is in heaven. Nor are you to be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Messiah. The greatest among you will be your servant. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. And friends, unfortunately, I've experienced this. When I first got saved, all I wanted to do was be recognized. Give me the mic, I want to preach. Let me lead worship. And there was so much of myself in it. I just wanted to be recognized for the gift that I was. Some prestige, some title, some profile, anything. Exerting influence in the church and hoping to be, especially when I become more mature, hoping to be recognized for my past achievements or abilities. I'll tell you a quick story. When we first planted the church, the day we planted our first ever meeting at Center Church, there was a guy at the meeting and he said to me, I didn't know him at all. He was a visitor at the first meeting. And there were very few people at the first meeting, maybe like 14 people. So him and his wife, never met him. And there were like 4 couples that planted. So what I'm saying is there weren't many visitors. And he walks up to me and he says, I own a very big business here in Joburg. My tithe could cover your salary. And immediately I'm like, okay, what's going on here? He says, but if I'm going to be in this church, there's 2 things that need to happen. Number 1, he says, you don't preach out of the ESV. You preach out of the King James Bible, King James Version. It's the only Bible. Secondly, you don't preach out of an iPad. He says, an iPad is disrespectful. All of a sudden, there's this giant, right, of looking good. Now, do I want to look good for this guy? I said to him, bud, you know what? You're going to have to find another church because being in this church is going to be hard for you. It's going to be like having a rhino. This is what I said to him. It's going to be like a rhino walking through your daisies every day, just crushing the garden. It's going to be really hard for you. And I never saw him again. And I'm not saying that because I'm some sort of hero and I don't believe in driving people away from church. But he didn't want to have a conversation about it. He wanted the control and he wanted me to try and look good for him, to be trying to earn his approval. I can't live in that place, friends. You can't plant, you can't live, you can't pioneer, like we spoke about last week. There's a very specific reason why we have chosen to build the way we have at Center Church. Guys, we've wrestled with this issue of titles and pedestals. We've wrestled with it. And I'm going to say something now that, whatever, I'm going to say it. I don't believe that if someone asks you to call them pastor, I don't believe it's just a different cultural thing. Oh, we don't do that at Center Church. Friends, I believe it is anti-biblical. I really, really do. Because what happens is, if someone asks you, please hear me, and we've chosen this method, it would be so easy for me to set myself up as John the pastor. Call me Pastor John. Hide behind my walls. No one comes into our house. Just, waft off the glories of God, never vulnerable about what I can do all that stuff. But friends, then what I've done is tried to replace Jesus, the only one who's perfect. Jesus said it himself. You don't call anyone rabbi. Why? Because I'm your teacher. You don't call anyone father. Why? Because you have a Father in heaven. And you don't call anyone your instructor because Jesus is your instructor, the Messiah. And it's so easy for us to go running to man, to look good in front of them. And we lose sight of the fact that we're meant to look good in front of Jesus. This giant has to die, friends. But it's all over the church like a bad rash. Church leaders standing up, standing on my pedestal, preaching from my pedestal. At Center Church, we believe in gift-centered leadership, not office-based leadership. What I mean by that is office. I'm not talking like an actual office. I mean like the office of an elder. Do what I say because I'm the elder. Do what I say. Listen to me because I'm a pastor, because I'm your pastor. That's commanding from your office. But no, right? Jesus has given me that office to love and care and become least, and to become the least of everyone. And that's what Cindy and I try to do as much as possible. So we try to be vulnerable. We try to be open. Have people in our home I don't want to hide things. And unfortunately, in the light of the world, sometimes that can look weak, but I'm okay with that. I really am okay with that because there is only one person, right, who is worth that praise, and that person is Jesus. Gift-centered leadership is this. I'm a gift to the body. Receive me as the gift that Jesus has made me. I don't have to fight for that. I don't need a title because I am the gift. Jesus has made me that gift. so I'm just going to be. Someone said to me the other day, the craziest thing about Center Church is you walk in and you realize there's no ladder, there's no floor. Where you walk in, that's the level, because we're all on that level. They said it's a bit disorientating, because then if that's the level, then what does advancement look? And then you realize advancement isn't climbing up some corporate ladder within the church. Advancement is advancing the kingdom, right, in the world. That's where we're meant to be advancing. Advancing the gospel out there. We're not meant to be turning the church into a business and climbing up and down a ladder. Leadership is laying our lives down, being at the bottom of the pile. And not being at the bottom of the pile so I can wallow in my sacrifice so that others can think that I'm amazing. Paul writes this about being an apostle, and it's amazing to me how many guys are running around with these titles. I'm apostle this, apostle that guy. It's ridiculous, because when Paul talks about an apostle in 1 Corinthians 4, he says, "For it seems to me that God has put us apostles on display at the end of the procession. Like those condemned to die in the arena, we have been made a spectacle to the whole universe, to angels as well as human beings." When I look at that, it's very different to the apostle who looks like he's farting angel dust and he's absolutely perfect and he utters the oracles of heaven at every turn. See, friends, I do believe, Paul says, "Follow me as I follow Christ." I do believe that my life should be an example to others. But it should be an example of what? Of Christ, not an example of John. And so people should look at me and go, they should be able to see through me. They should be like, "John, there's no ways you're that good. It must be Jesus." And always pointing to him. So I don't believe in going, just abdicating and going, I can look bad because it doesn't matter. I don't want to look like Jesus. No. Right? I want to look like Christ. And I want to represent Christ. But I don't want to look good for you. Right? I want Christ to be magnified in the eyes of others. It's a big difference between those two things. And the last thought is this. There's a story in the Old Testament in 1 Kings 18. Eden and I have been reading it together this week and laughing about it. So there's this guy called Ahab, and he's married to a witch called Jezebel, like genuine, like witch, like Liva Hexy, on the broom, black cat, the hat, the whole shebang. The Bible doesn't say she dressed like that, but she was a witch, right? And Elijah is like the last of the prophets of God. And this witchy chick and her husband Ahab have brought the pagan gods into Israel. They worship Baal and Asherah and all these guys. And every night, like Jezebel sits at the table, it says she sits there and she has dinner with these 450 prophets of Baal. They eat with her, and she's just like, it's like these evil guys, like the baddies. And Elijah says to Ahab, "Okay, let's have a showdown. Let's see who really is God." And so they go up to Mount Carmel, and this is the thing. They say, "We're going to make 2 altars, and they're going to put a sacrifice, a bull on the altar, and the God who answers with fire." So you can't light the fire. The God who sends fire to burn up that offering, he is God in heaven. He's the real God. And Elijah, if you look at 1 Kings 18, he's mocked by the king. He's mocked by the prophets of Baal. Like he does not look good at all. These prophets of Baal, they had this like safety numbers. We all look good because we're saying the same thing, and we get to hang out with Jezebel. She's the queen. And Elijah's completely counterculture. And what happens is eventually these prophets of Baal are prophesying and nothing's happening, so they start cutting themselves. Then Elijah jumps in and he says, "Shout louder. Surely he's a god. Perhaps he's deep in thought. Maybe he's relieving himself. So maybe he's on the loo taking a dump, or busy or traveling." So Elijah has a bit of a go at their God. Maybe he's sleeping and must be awake. And they shout louder, they cut themselves, all this stuff, and nothing happens. And then in the evening, I love this, at noon, then Elijah said to the people, "Come here to me." They came to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord, which had been torn down at Carmel. He took 12 stones, one for each of the tribes of Israel, to whom the word of the Lord had come, which said, "Your name shall be Israel." And he tells them to fill 4 large jars with water and pour it on the offering on the wood. Do it again, do it again, do it a 3rd time. And eventually they've absolutely soaked Elijah's sacrifice. And the prophets of Baal are standing there bleeding, their sacrifice is stinking, nothing's happened. At the time of the sacrifice, the prophet Elijah stepped forward and prayed, "Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so that these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again." Then the fire of the Lord fell and burnt up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, the soil, and also licked up the water in the trench. When all the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, "The Lord, He is God. He is God." Here's the thing. No one fell and went, "Elijah, he's so flippin' amazing." No one said that. They said, "The Lord, He is God." And friends, Elijah wasn't trying to look good. He was trying to turn people's hearts back to God. And I've come to see this in my life, friends. Because what happens after that is Elijah prays for rain. God begins to send rain. And then Ahab, the bad guy, jumps in his chariot and he's racing back to Jezreel, the city where he is. And Elijah, the Spirit of God comes on Elijah. And Elijah outruns Ahab's chariots, the king's chariots with his horses. Outruns them all the way to Jezreel. Just this supernatural, ridiculous fire from heaven. He's outrunning a chariot. This guy's nuts. Friends, I believe this. A church that is given into trying to look good will be a powerless church. There is no power in a church that's trying to look good for the world. And we have to make a choice. If we want to be a church that is powerful and effective, when I say power, the power of God, the supernatural power of God, we have to be people that are able to take our eyes off what people think and turn our eyes towards heaven. Because sometimes when God asks us to step out, it doesn't look good. It can look pretty embarrassing. It can look a little bit awkward. It can look a bit different. And God calls us to step out and take these big steps of faith. And as we do that, the power of God comes in and people go, "The Lord, He is God." Not Elijah's amazing. No one said that in that moment. A church which is trying to look good, a Christian who's trying to look good, is powerless. Our power and authority come from submitting to Jesus and living out His commands, agreeing with Jesus, walking in step with Him. So here's the question. Can we as a church be so aware of our motives? Friends, can we take this giant and deal with him? I've been wrestling with this thing the last 2 weeks as I've been prepping this. God help me in my heart. Cindy and I have been talking about it, and I hate to admit that there are areas in my life where this guy's got a bit of a foothold. But I'm dealing with those things. And I'm in that promised land. And we're fighting for inheritance, not just for ourselves, but for the sake of other people. And in the camp, we're dealing with those things as well, where He's come in. Can we be aware of Jesus for Him and His sake alone? Jesus, if no one ever knows what I do, if no one ever sees what I've done, You know, and that's enough for me. Jesus, You see my life in secret. You see how I live my life. I want to look good. I want to stand in this audience of one. Can we agree this evening, or this morning, with John the Baptist in John chapter 3 verse 30, where he said, "He must increase, but I must decrease." Because that the giant of look good says you must increase, and Jesus can go fly a kite, but you need to look good. There's an absolute importance of the abiding presence of God. If I have forgotten that God is with me, or even worse, I feel He's sitting there scoring me, ticking and scoring me, friends, I'm going to get on a treadmill and get involved in religion and try and look good in a way that I never should. But if I know that He is with me no matter what, I don't have to try and look good, because I've received all I need for life and godliness from our Father in heaven. We have such an incredible Father in heaven who has paid for our redemption. We are no longer the orphans outside the window trying to earn our way in. He's made us sons and daughters of the Most High God. This isn't the green card lottery to get into the US. Right? If I earn enough, if I play my cards right, I'll get a ticket in. Jesus has come and made salvation available to all of us. I wonder if I can pray for us. And I'll hand back to the guys. Lord, thank You for this morning. Thank You for what You said to us. Lord, I pray that You challenge us. Lord, that we never become comfortable, Lord, that as we keep growing and as we keep putting one foot in front of the next, Lord, that You will challenge us. You'll point these things out, Lord. Set us free, Lord, from a man-pleasing spirit. Set us free from trying to look good the whole time, Lord. Lord, that we could be those who honestly, Lord, obsess about looking good before the King of Heaven. Come to You. Have I done well, God? Have I done Your bidding? We listen for that. Well done, my good and faithful servant. Thank You for Your presence this morning, Lord. Thank You for the way that You've been ministering right across the city as we meet in our homes. We love You, Jesus, in Your name. Amen.
Thank you so much for joining us. You might be asking yourself the question, how can I take this further? Firstly, You can send us your contact details to cindy@centerchurch.co.za, where we can include you in our online connect groups and you can receive our daily devotional. Secondly, you can hop on our website where you can access previous sermons and find out more about who we are at Center Church. Thirdly, if you consider yourself as part of Center Church, we want to thank you so much for your ongoing financial partnership. The banking details are on the website. Thank you so much for joining us and hope you have an amazing Sunday.